I want you to use your imaginations today because I want to tell you a story. But before that, I've got a couple questions to ask you. First of all, what would happen if Jesus, time should go back and Jesus would walk into our town today? What would you do? Where would you be?
Happy.
What if I told you this Tuesday night, Jesus is going to be right here at our Bible study at 7 o'clock?
I will be there.
Would the rest of you be here?
Don't make promises.
Yeah, don't make promises.
Thank you for John.
But then here's another question. Where would he spend the night? Would he spend the night with you? Kurt? Would he stay at my house? Would we have to get him a motel? Just some questions to think about. He came to somebody's house in Luke, the 10th chapter, and verses 38 through 42. We have a story where Jesus came to a certain home in the town of Bethany. So if you have your Bibles there, open up to Luke, the 10th chapter, and I'd like you to follow along with me as I read verses 38 through 42, okay? Just let me know when we're all ready to do this. Raise your hand, say amen, do something so I know we're ready.
Amen.
Okay, good. All right, here we go. Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village. And a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me." And Jesus answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her." So you see, there was a house outside of Jerusalem in the little town of Bethany where Jesus could come and stay. Now, I told you in the beginning we were going to use our imagination. So let's do for a little bit. Let's look first at Martha. I mean, Martha was a good woman, don't you think? Yeah, I do. And she probably never did anything wrong as such in her whole life. I can just picture Martha as one that just seems to always do the right thing. And at first glance, you would think that her trouble was to help, just give me some help in the kitchen. But notice Jesus' answer to her. Martha was troubled about many things. Now, that could be a sign that Martha had not learned to have a trusting relationship with Jesus. At least not the kind of relationship Mary had. Perhaps Martha had not learned to take time to sit at Jesus' feet. Well, according to Jesus, she's not just troubled about one thing. She's troubled about many things. Maybe Martha was what we would call today a worrier. You think, I will have to admit this, though. Martha was a good organizer. And I bet you that she was a master in the kitchen. She just strikes me as that type. And you have to admit that although Martha was a good organizer, she still was troubled. Troubled about many things. Maybe it's because because she had not laid her burdens down at the feet of Jesus. And maybe the reason she hadn't is because, as I said before, she had not spent enough time at the feet of Jesus. Now Mary, in contrast, is sitting at the feet of Jesus, just soaking in every word that he is saying. You understand that there's two routes, I should say, two routes to the feet of Jesus. There's one that is short. It's immediate, cheerful. You obey the voice of God as a child. And then there's the long route. Now this route, it seems, is one that most of us end up taking. And probably the reason that we end up taking that route is because of our pride and self-will. We all know that this way, this long route that is filled with pride and self-help is also filled with trouble and heartache. You see, that last route, that was the route that Mary took. Now, as we continue with our imagination, we find that she had been there, done that, so to speak, and now she had found a way. She had found a way to have the feet of Jesus with her, and she was determined that nothing was going to pry her away from that presence with Jesus, listening to every word that he had to say. Let's go back a few years before this date, where Jesus is in the house of Martha and Mary. And let's look at Mary for just a moment. In our imaginations, let's suppose that Mary is in her late teens or early 20s. She was a fun person to be around. I can just see Mary having a bubbling personality. Everybody liked Mary. And I'm sure she was much more fun to be around than Martha. Then one day, even though Martha got things done, Mary was enjoying life. And as I said, one day, maybe it was at a church picnic, Mary meets a man by the name of Simon. Now you understand that Simon was a Pharisee. And there was another problem. Simon was married. Unfortunately, due to Simon's encouragement, that relation grew. And you understand that consequences were very severe for that type of relationship. Stoning is not a pleasant experience for anyone. Perhaps because of all this, Mary decided to leave town and move north along the Sea of Galilee to the town of Magdala. Well, maybe she did that because there in Magdala, I said Magdala, I think it's really Magda, was probably the better pronunciation. I think she did that because no one knew her there. She could start over fresh there. But unfortunately, things didn't work out the way Mary had planned it all out. And there was no work for her, no money, and things really began to get tough. However, Mary was good, remember, at making friends. Perhaps it was one of those friendships that gave her an opportunity to make some money. Maybe she rationalized that this is only temporary, just to get through some of these hard times, just to get these bills paid. But soon she is recognized in the city of Magda for what she was. Successful businesswoman, oh yeah, but a prostitute. Over and over, She reasoned that she would change, but those promises were like ropes of sand. She would stop for a while, but then she would meet someone that knew her well enough, and it was back to the same old lifestyle. One day, she hears a rumor. There's this rumor going around that there was a man with tremendous power. And it is said that this man made his headquarters just a few hours actually walk north of Magda, around the western shore of the Sea of Galilee in the city of Capernaum. So Mary starts out north. She walks to the city of Capernaum, and there she sat at the feet of Jesus, listening to him. And as she was there listening to him, she could feel the power that was stronger in her now than all the evil that had been there before, and all that evil that had been controlling her past. She felt, wow, in the presence of Jesus, it's gone. Mary was delivered. The shackles of sin were broken, and she experienced the freedom in Jesus that we all do when we realize that sin doesn't have to have dominion over us. I can just see her heading back toward Magda, full of joy, ready to witness to those who had the same miserable life that she did. And all along the way, I can just hear her singing praises to God and the one who delivered her. But when she arrives back in Magda, something awful happens. You see, Satan has plans to see that many would lose their hold on Jesus. And he was successful with Mary, unfortunately. She returns to her old way of life. I can just hear the people around her saying, "See, I told you it wouldn't last." Miserable, Mary is determined to go back and find Jesus. She somehow knew that Jesus would treat her here in a way that no other man would treat her. You see, Jesus isn't the kind of person who, when faced with failure, will give up on someone. And again, in his presence, she feels hope and power, and she finds deliverance a second time, a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, a sixth time. And then finally, Mary comes to the realization that if the deliverance was going to last, she would have to find a way to practice the presence of Jesus even when she wasn't physically in his presence. And some way to experience that power. And she does. And the seventh time, she made that discovery. Now Mary is eager to go home. She had the conviction in her heart that Jesus had finally filled her life, and it was going to be lasting this time. Despite the defeats that she had faced, despite the misery of the past, she was determined to go home and face the situation. And I can imagine that all kinds of thoughts raced through her head. Thoughts like, after all these years, will her sister Mary accept her? And will she allow her to come back into her home? And then, what about her brother Lazarus? And then there was that contemplative gaze of Simon. But but she decides she's going home anyway. And as she comes near the city of Bethany, she hears that mournful cry of the leper, "Unclean, unclean," and immediately she moves to the side of the road out of the way. But wait, that voice sounded familiar. Could it be? No, it can't be. But it is. It's Simon. Simon has leprosy. And as he passes, she says, "Simon, it's me, Mary. Simon, something wonderful has happened. My life has been changed. I found Jesus." Simon just keeps going. Mary calls after him, "Simon, Jesus can heal leprosy." Well, things are hard back home. People shun her. She can feel their stares. She can hear their whispers. But through all this, she feels the power in her life, which is stronger than any power in hell itself. A power that comes from practicing the presence of Jesus every moment. Sitting at his feet even when he isn't physically present. She is able to hang on day after day after day. And soon the evidence of her changed life becomes evident, at least to everyone who really matters. And word comes to Bethany that Jesus is headed in that direction again. Mary is ecstatic because Jesus usually stayed at the home of Martha and Lazarus. And when he was in town, but would he stay this time knowing that she's there? And that brings us full circle back to our text, Luke 10:38. We see Jesus coming to town, and now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me." And Jesus answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken from her." Mary was determined that nothing would separate her from the presence of Jesus. Amen. Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her. Well, as the story continues, time passes. And one day, tragedy comes to the home of Mary and Martha. Lazarus, their brother, he becomes ill. Word is sent immediately to Jesus. "Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick." Mary and Martha wait, and they wait, but Jesus doesn't come, and their faith is tested. Finally, Jesus arrives. We find the narrative in John 11, in verse 21. "Now Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.'" And I believe that is absolutely true. Don't you? If Jesus had been there, Lazarus wouldn't have died. But he wasn't. So Martha continues, "But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Isn't that beautiful faith? Wow, to have that kind of faith. Amen. Verse 33, "Therefore when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and he said, "Where have you laid him?" That day, Lazarus was raised from the grave.
Amen.
That day, a dead man actually got up and walked, fully alive. Now let's move forward a little bit more. It's a week before the crucifixion. The scene changes. Jesus returns to Bethany one final time before he goes to the cross, and a man named Simon has planned a party. Oh, that's right. It's the same Simon who had leprosy, only now he's experienced the cleansing power of God in his body, but not totally in his heart. Continue with our imaginations. Simon has it all planned. It's going to be a fantastic event. The seating will be arranged such that I will sit on one side of Jesus, Simon is thinking, and then I'll have Lazarus sitting on the other side, and boy, everybody's going to come. What more could you ask for? You will have Simon, who is healed of leprosy, and there will be Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, and then, of course, there will be Jesus. John 12, 1 and 2. Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with Jesus. Did you notice something? There was no mention of Mary there, was there? In fact, some commentators question even if she had, whether or not she had been invited. Lazarus was there. Martha had been asked to cater the event, but no mention of Mary being invited. I can picture Mary sitting at home, wanting so desperately to be with Jesus. And then deciding that she would go anyway, even if she didn't have an invitation. It's going to be dark, and I'll stay in the shadows, she thought, and nobody will notice that I'm there. I believe Mary was beginning to grasp the reality that Jesus was going to die. And so she brings a jar of costly ointment. Staying in the shadows, she enters the banquet hall and finds Jesus. She quietly moves to his feet, but as she opens that jar of ointment, the fragrance is so loud, all eyes begin to focus on her. And that was not what she wanted. She pours the ointment on Jesus' head and feet, and then tears begin to flow, and she wipes his feet with her hair. I want you to notice Simon's reaction in Luke 7 and verse 39. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." I really love the way that Jesus handles this. It's like he reads Simon's thoughts, and he gives him a look that lets Simon know that he knew all of it. And then Jesus, instead of exposing his host, spoke a little parable to him, which brought Simon conviction of heart. And at that moment, Simon's spirit began to heal. There was another reaction at the table as besides Simon. Judas was also there, and he also had something to say. John records it in chapter 12 and verse 5. Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? In Matthew's comments on the scene, he records Judas as asking the question, why this waste? Isn't it interesting that Satan was right there to use those very words against Jesus? Jesus is about to pour out heaven's richest gift for people who didn't care. Why this waste? Why do people still scorn the richest gift that heaven can offer? Why this waste? I'll tell you why. For Mary, and for others like her, for you and for me. Why this waste? We need to be more like Mary in the sense that we come to the foot of the cross and we hold on. At the tomb was Mary. It was there at the tomb that she hears a voice that she had learned to recognize by sitting at his feet. And again she falls at his feet. Sitting at his feet in life, listening to every word that he said. Kneeling at his feet before the cross, weeping. Falling at his feet at the tomb. Mary had discovered one thing that is needful for all of us. Sitting, falling, holding on to the feet of Jesus. So I have a solution when we are faced with all kinds of problems. When we come to a point that we cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. When we think that nobody is listening and nobody's caring about what we are going through, I'll come to the feet of Jesus. That's the solution. See, it's at the feet of Jesus that we have power. We find power to face whatever situation we find ourselves in.
Amen.
We have power to face every temptation that the devil can throw at us. So when you're faced with that kind of situation, come to the feet of Jesus. He will give you deliverance. Let us pray. Father in heaven, I thank you so much for Jesus. I thank you for the stories that you have in Scripture that gives us hope. That we can see that other people have gone through some things that we've gone through. We can see that it's not about how good our life is. It's about how good Jesus is. We can see that no matter what our life has been like, it can be changed at the feet of Jesus. So, Father, I'm asking your Spirit to fall on each and every one here and each and every one that hears my voice. That your Spirit will fill us and encourage us and strengthen us for the days ahead, for whatever we may face, that we will hold on to Jesus. In his precious name I pray.